The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
As we get into our teaching moment today, we're going to be talking about best practices for evaluator training. There are some tools that the Center for Procurement Excellence already has available on the topic of evaluation. So for those of you who may have taken our online RFP course, which is a 9-hour virtual course, it comes with a handbook, including all of these tools. And also, I believe, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that members have access to these tools through the tools and templates area of the website as well. So if you've taken the course as a member or not, you've got these. If you're a member, you can get into the website and access them as well. But quickly, what they are is we have an FAQ essentially of common evaluation questions that we get from procurement officers and procurement agents. So there's a big Q&A there. We have a full template for a source selection plan. So that's in the tools box as well. And then we have a few guides to doing proposal evaluations and ratings, conducting the overall evaluation process. So all of that's available as well. So that's some of the background information that you have accessible to you as a member or a course participant. And if you don't have those, let us know, and we can get you synced up with how to proceed and get access to some of those cool tools. That is what we are all about here at the Center for Procurement Excellence. That's a mouthful there. I'm having trouble today. And we want to produce tools that are immediately usable and will help you on your very next RFP. So with that, I'm going to go through an evaluator training summary here. So the perspective of the evaluator training summary slides here is we have found it to be a good practice to provide your evaluation teams in your RFPs. It's a good practice to provide them with certainly specific training at each step of your RFP evaluation process. And an extra tip here is to send them a brief video in advance that covers some of the basics, right? So that by the time we take the opportunity to meet with our internal evaluation groups or evaluation committees, they've already been pre-exposed to some of the thinking and the behind the evaluation and how they're going to proceed. So that by the time you meet with those teams and start walking through more of the specifics for that individual RFP and that RFP's schedule, you're a little bit further down the road. You've already pre-educated them, so to speak. So that's the theme of this summary. Is I'm going to walk through a generic evaluator training. That's something that, since we are recording here, it's something we may be able to snip up, and we could, send it in advance to our evaluators and make your own version of something similar as a pre-training before you then meet with them, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to approach this as if I'm talking to evaluators, essentially. So here we go. Welcome to our evaluator training summary video. What we're going to cover here is overall and objectives and steps of the evaluation process for our RFPs. We'll mention some of the ground rules that we want to be mindful of as we go through the evaluation process together. We'll chat about the evaluation scale and the surrounding forms that we'll use as we conduct our evaluations. And then we'll close out with a bit of conversation around the evaluation schedule and what to expect next for the RFP activities. In terms of overall objective, what's important for an evaluation committee to remember is that in the evaluation process, we're just trying to find the best team, the best proposal, and maybe the best product if this is maybe a software type of project or something else that's product related. We're not trying to solve all of the project details and problems in the evaluation process. This is not that time. We're just looking for the best at this point in time. It's a judgment of who the best proposal is. So first, what we're trying to do is to quickly and efficiently identify the best proposal. And once we've done that, then we'll spend more time with that group in the eventual contracting process. Certainly, we want to go through all the due diligence before a contract is signed, but keep that in mind as we go through the evaluation process. We're looking to differentiate the best and then spend more time with them down the road. In terms of evaluation steps, most RFPs are going to follow these 4 general procedures. Step number 1, we're going to evaluate the proposals, typically the written proposal materials that were submitted by vendor teams. So typical contents might be a project plan, a project approach, background, resumes, experience, things of that nature. And really our goal in the evaluation process here is to look for clear, justifiable differences between the submitted proposal contents. Based upon that, we'll typically determine a short list. So we'll look at the full pool or competing field of vendors and narrow down to the most competitive proposals that we want to invite then into step 3, which is interviews and or demonstrations. So when we're at those interviews and demonstrations, this is where we're going to zero in and find the absolute best team in the interviews, and certainly structure our demos to find the best proven product that meets our needs as a client organization. That's the step there. Once we've done all of that, then the final step is to look at the overall evaluation results and then make that selection or make that determination of which vendor is the best fit for our needs. So that's the next step. And then that'll then roll into the whole contracting process. So that's the big picture of what's going to happen in the evaluation steps. In terms of some ground rules that are recommended for a solid evaluation process, here's a few. First up is that these will be individual evaluations. So every member of the evaluation committee is going to be asked to conduct their own individual evaluation scores. This is not score by group consensus. We can talk about that more as a group when we meet together as a project team. But basically, each evaluator has been selected to serve on the panel or to serve on the committee based upon their perspective and expertise that they're bringing for the organization. And so we want to make sure that we honor that expertise and that perspective in the evaluation process. So we're asking that evaluators don't discuss their scores and questions amongst each other. So please score based upon your individual perspective as an evaluator. We're trying to keep the evaluations as non-biased as possible. So, using our logic and verifiable information that's straight from the proposals. We are not to go beyond the proposal content itself in making our judgments. Use the information that was specifically provided by the vendors in their proposal response to our RFP. We need to be honest and as fair as possible with doing those evaluations and ratings. And of course, the procurement agent or the buyer who's facilitating the process does reserve the right to clarify any scores, ratings, get additional comments and justification to make sure that everything is fair and square and defensible. So that's the overall ground rules. Now, if you look at that and say, well, why not do this as a group consensus? That's a whole separate conversation. We're happy to talk about that. The big thing here is you do have the ability, if you see something that's a concern or you see something that's a risk, raise the flag, flag that, let procurement know, and there are mechanisms to make sure we handle that. You don't have to feel like you're stuck in a silo, just looking at things by yourself. The main purpose of this idea is to keep things as fair as possible and enable each evaluator to have a say in the process. The other thing that's a strong recommendation that we'll typically do is keep the cost or financial proposals separate from the rest of the qualifications-based elements that are being evaluated by the team. So the way that this will normally work is that cost is held separately and not revealed to the evaluators until after they've done their evaluation scoring. Now, rest assured, cost is factored in before we get to a short list. It is numerically entered in by procurement. So it's reviewed, it's there, it's considered, it's just done so numerically and not revealed as a judgment call that we have to look at this point in time. There are also cost checks and verifications that'll happen at the end of the process of evaluations as well. So those are some of the big picture ground rules. In terms of evaluation scale, there can be different scales for different organizations. Here's a common one that we'll cover together. A common 1 through 10 scale. So 10 being good or substantially above and beyond requirements and expectations, all the way down through 1, substantially below requirements and expectations when we're reading these proposals. And then there's the middle, where these are the proposals that are roughly average or acceptable. They don't completely differentiate themselves from other proposals. They're essentially providing us what is expected. And so the perspective here in the middle is, as an evaluator, we'd be neutral or indifferent about inviting that proposal to the interviews. And notice what we're doing here. We're at this stage up front when we're in step 1 of the evaluation process, evaluating the written proposals. The question here is scoring the proposal contents to then help us get to a short list for interviews and demonstrations. That's the next step. Once we're at interviews and demonstrations, then we're talking more about which team and which product do we want to hire. So this is just about getting to interviews and demos. The other thing that you'll notice in this scoring rubric is we mentioned the document. The reason for this is that oftentimes in a written proposal, there's multiple different elements that we're going to score and evaluate. So as an evaluation team, you may be asked to provide multiple scores for each vendor. You might be rating their project approach as one scoring element, and then separately their qualifications and background as another, just as an example. The purpose of following our evaluation scale is to make sure that we're staying consistent and reminding you of this big point. The role of the evaluation team is that you're not supposed to make a decision of which vendor we are selecting. In other words, the proposals must differentiate themselves from their competition. It is the responsibility of the proposing vendors to show how they meet our requirements or even exceed them. And it's their job to build that case for why they should receive a high score. And what we're doing as evaluators is looking for that clear and justifiable information that will support our scores. In other words, if the proposals look roughly the same, then give them the same score. Don't try to inject a decision in there to find a difference and look for a difference when there really isn't one that's justifiably there. In terms of tips for conducting our scores, and we'll continue using a 1 through 10 scale as the example. Imagine, as an example here, that we were evaluating proposals for dining services. So typically this would include scope of sourcing and delivering all the food products for a dining hall and cafeteria facilities. It would be the staffing of running those facilities and cooking the food, maintaining and operating those facilities, and so forth. So imagine we're looking at that type of a proposal response as a part of our evaluation efforts. Here's 3 quick examples of what you might see. These are actually from real proposals for projects that we've helped with in the past, and I'll read them quickly here. So proposal number 1, something they said in their work plan or their project approach is, in providing dining services, safeguarding the health and safety of our people and customers is our moral responsibility. It's essential to the success of the business. We've worked hard to establish our safety culture. Our people instinctively take individual and collective responsibility for their own safety and that of those around them and act accordingly. Okay, sounds nice. We're talking about keeping it safe, minimizing foodborne illness, and so on. Well, proposal 2. The food we serve, places we work, our day-to-day operations, we make sure safety is an every moment, everyday mindset. We work hard to create a safety culture. All employees can stop any situation in which they feel unsafe. Sounds quite similar. Some of it is word for word similar to proposal number 1. Go to number 3, maybe we'll see a difference. Health and safety is a global strategic priority for our firm. We are committed to a global health and safety culture, world-class health and safety performance, integrate this into everything we do to minimize risk. Now, if these are the 3 proposals that we're reading as part of a work plan or a project approach, if you go back to our 1 through 10 scale, the quick answer for what score we should be giving here is these are 5s. They're right in the middle. They're about the same. They don't really look any different. None of them wow us or make us excited. It's just exactly what we would expect. And so therefore, they're 5s. They're right in the middle. What we're really doing, though, is we're looking for who that expert will be out of the competing bunch. And so here are some thinking tips as an evaluation team of what you should be looking for between lower scoring proposals and higher scoring proposals, which hopefully is what we are seeing. So content that comes back boilerplate rather than project specific. If you feel like they could copy and paste their proposal to any other client in any other project. If it's very generic, very general, relative to being something that's specific and actionable, you understand exactly what they're going to do. Are they pushing risk and decision-making back to you as the client, or are they coming forward and recommending, here are the options, here's the solutions that we would recommend? That's an indicator of expertise. Do they sound like everyone else? In other words, the example that we just went through, they all sounded very similar. If that's the case, then they're not differentiating themselves from the competition. You want to reserve your high scores for those who differentiate and stand out. If it's fluffy, salesy, rather than being clear and direct and to the points, promises how great they are rather than explaining how they're actually going to be successful and meet your scope, and so on. You get the picture here. Now, when doing our evaluation scoring, the other thing that procurement will provide is a standard set of evaluation forms. Here is an example of what they typically look like. So let's say we've got firm A, B, and C competing. Here might be a standard evaluation form. We'll insert our 1 through 10 ratings here in the scoring area. And then we also want to make sure that we're collecting feedback and comments to support those scores. So strengths and weaknesses is typically the way to go about documenting feedback you have on proposal evaluations as you're conducting them. And as you're filling out those comments, the idea here is to be as specific as possible. Refer to specific contents in the response. Don't just say, I really liked vendor A. Their project plan was good. That doesn't help us understand, well, why? What were some of the specific elements of their approach that was helpful? What was a strength in your eyes? Or things that were less helpful, areas where they fell short, things that you saw were a weakness? Point to those specifics in their proposal, and that gives us something more to stand on. And a good way to think about this is, imagine that that vendor is sitting across the table from you and we're having a conversation with them, or we're doing a debrief with them. If we just said, yeah, your proposal was good, or it wasn't as good as others, then the obvious next question is going to be, well, why? What specifically? And so the more we can document those comments and provide that clear, concrete justification, then it helps the overall evaluation process. Last up here is the evaluation schedule. So in our evaluation schedule, a couple things to remind us of, because of course our schedule will be different for every individual RFP. But the first thing we want to remind the evaluation committee about is that we did publish key evaluation milestones in our RFP. So we have told the vendor community certain milestones in the evaluation process. Typically, when we're going to notify them for interviews and demonstrations, how long that's going to last, what that window of time is, when we're going to make our final selection, or usually what's published in the RFP. So we've given a procurement schedule to the outside world, in other words. Now, that procurement schedule has already been pre-planned and set up with the project team to make sure it meets all the needs and requirements of our project or of the service that we are hiring for. So they should be synced together with that. But the other thing that we need to spend more time talking about in the evaluation process is all of the internal steps that we're going to go through as an evaluation committee to get through the scoring process. So that'll be the next step in meeting with your procurement representative as part of the project team and evaluation committee, is to go through that internal schedule. There's a lot of little details that happen between these 4 steps. And at this point, the key thing to remind the evaluation committee of is to just double check your availability to meet those major milestones that were published in the RFP. Now, if you've got a vacation coming up, and it's happening right at the time that you're supposed to be in the interviews or the demonstrations, we're not saying to cancel your vacation here. It's please communicate that to your procurement representative. Make sure we understand everyone's availability. Hopefully this was pre-planned in advance as part of the upfront scheduling effort of the RFP. So with that, to summarize the evaluation overview training, number 1, what we are trying to accomplish is to select the best team, proposals, and product. We're not trying to answer all the questions about the product or service at this time. It's just picking the best, differentiating between them. But the responsibility to stand out and show that they are the best that should be selected, that responsibility is on the vendors. So we're not going to inject any decision-making here. We're just looking for justification within the contents of the proposal and then subsequent interviews and demos. Please use the evaluation scale that we've set for this project and the surrounding forms. And finally, as a look ahead, next steps will be that procurement will schedule a specific meeting with the evaluation committee to provide more detailed instructions and answer any questions. We will then conduct those individual evaluations, provide your scores back to procurements. Those will be averaged, compiled, put together, and used to determine the shortlist as we then head into interviews and demonstrations. And at that time, there will be additional instructions provided around the specifics and logistics of the interview and demonstration process.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.